How can Kelechi, an ordinary sculptor who is a nobody, and happened to return back to the village after years of travel just to take care of his aged and sick mom and to rest from his travel, happen to be the one Adana heart chose and longed for, and eventually wins the approval of the whole village elders and Adana's father over Obinna, who is a mighty warrior, from a wealthy family, a respected individual, and a man every woman in the village fight to have. It wasn't an easy thing at all, but fate and prophecy happened to make it possible. How so? The night Adana was born, the sky was not as it should have been. The elders of Umwagu village gathered outside their huts, their eyes wide with wonder and fear as they looked up. The full moon, bright and silver just moments ago, had begun to darken, swallowed by a creeping shadow. "It is an eclipse," one elder murmured, gripping his staff. "The gods are speaking." Inside the hut of Neka, Adana's mother, the wails of a newborn baby mixed with the hurried prayers of midwives. A strong gust of wind rushed through the open windows, sending the flames of the oil lamps flickering. Neka, drenched in sweat, weak from labor, held her baby close. She could barely see her daughter's face in the dim light, but she knew something was different. Then came the village seer, Dibia Ifika, an old man with deep wrinkles carved into his dark skin like the sacred symbols drawn on the earth before a divination. He arrived unannounced, stepping through the doorway with an air of reverence. The midwives, sensing something beyond their understanding, parted for him. He leaned on his staff, his old bones creaking as he bent over the child. He did not ask to see the baby. Instead, he closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, as if drawing the essence of the night into himself. A long silence followed, thick with expectation. Then, he spoke. This child, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of an undeniable truth. She is not like others. She is tied to the moon, to fate itself. One day, when the moon sings her name, her true love will be revealed. Murmurs rippled through the midwives. Neka tightened her hold on her baby, a mixture of awe and fear tightening her chest. "What does it mean?" she asked. Dibia Ifika sighed. "It means that this child's heart does not belong to men's desires or their arranged betrothals. The gods will decide for her. She will know love when the time is right." At that moment, the moon returned to its full brightness outside, as if the heavens themselves had blessed the prophecy. Years later, Adana grew into a woman of striking beauty, her deep brown skin glowing under the sun, her dark eyes filled with intelligence and warmth. She was kind-hearted, with a laugh that carried like music through the village. But what truly set her apart was the strange aura she carried, the unshakable feeling that her life was meant for something greater than the ordinary path of marriage and motherhood. Many suitors came for her hand, but her parents, remembering the prophecy, were reluctant to accept any proposals. The young men of Umwagu, strong warriors and wealthy traders alike, vied for her affection, yet she remained unattached. And then, the time came when she had to choose. Her father, a respected elder, called her to the obi, the central hut where important family matters were discussed. She entered and found two men waiting, Obinna and Kelechi. Obinna was the pride of Umwagu, a warrior whose strength was matched only by his arrogance. He had fought in battles, won countless wrestling matches, and carried the scars to prove it. His family was wealthy, and his father had already spoken to Adana's father about the marriage arrangements. Kelechi, on the other hand, was different. A sculptor, an artist. His hands, though strong, were gentle, and his heart carried a depth that few could understand. He had returned to the village after years of traveling, bringing with him stories carved in wood, each sculpture more mesmerizing than the last. Her father's voice was stern. "Adana, it is time you choose a husband. These two men are worthy. Decide." Adana looked at both men, her heart steady, but unsure. Obinna met her gaze with a smirk, confident in his victory. Kelechi, however, simply looked at her with a quiet intensity, as if he already understood the weight of her dilemma. A part of her wanted to obey tradition, to make her family proud by choosing the warrior. But another part, a deeper, hidden part, longed for something else, something she could not name. And then, in the distance, the moon began to rise. It was full, round, and luminous, casting a pale glow over the village. The evening air felt charged, as if the earth itself held its breath. Adana shivered, an unexplainable feeling washing over her. A strange, distant melody drifted through the wind. It was soft at first, barely audible, like the whisper of the night. But then it grew clearer, fuller. It was not from any drum, nor the flutes of the village musicians. It was something else, something divine. And then, as if carried by the voice of the wind itself, she heard it. Her name. Adana. Her breath hitched. Her heart pounded. She turned sharply, scanning the horizon. The village elders paused in their conversations. The young maidens, gathered near the fires, stood still. Even the children, who had been playing just moments ago, seemed to sense the shift in the air. "What is it?" her father asked, concern flickering in his eyes. Adana's lips parted, but no words came. She didn't know how to explain what she had just experienced. Kelechi took a slow step forward. He, too, had heard something. His hand went to the small wooden flute he carried around his neck, his fingers tracing its smooth surface. Without thinking, without planning, he lifted it to his lips and played. The sound that came forth was unlike anything the village had ever heard. It was haunting, beautiful, filled with longing. It carried the weight of untold stories, of dreams whispered to the moon. Adana gasped. She had heard this song before. Not in reality. Not in any memory she could recall. But deep within her soul. And in that moment, she knew. Kelechi was the one. The prophecy had begun to unfold. The night after the prophecy began to unfold, the village of Umwagu buzzed with whispers. The elders, the women at the stream, the hunters returning from the forests, all spoke of what had happened in the Obi. They spoke of how Adana had heard her name in the wind, of how Kelechi's flute had carried a melody that seemed to have come from the gods themselves. Some called it fate. Others called it coincidence. But one man called it an insult, Obinna. The warrior had always believed Adana would be his. He was strong, wealthy, and respected in the village. No woman had ever refused him, and he had never imagined Adana would hesitate, let alone be drawn to someone like Kelechi, a mere sculptor. That night, he stormed into his family's compound, his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. His mother, a proud woman who had raised him to believe he was destined for greatness, was waiting. "What happened?" she demanded. "The entire village is talking." Obinna exhaled sharply. "The girl is confused." His mother folded her arms, studying him. "Confused? Or has another man stolen what was meant for you?" Obinna didn't answer. His hands balled into fists. His mother clicked her tongue. "Then you must act, my son. The elders favor you. The girl's family will not break tradition over a foolish flute." Obinna nodded. He would win this. He had to. Across the village, in a much humbler home, Kelechi sat outside under the same moon that had sung Adana's name. He carved absent-mindedly, his hands working on a small wooden figure, Adana's face. His heart was in turmoil. He had not come to Umwagu looking for love. He had returned to see his aging mother, to rest from his travels. Yet from the moment he had seen Adana, something within him had shifted. He had spent years carving statues, each telling a story. But never before had he wanted to carve the same face over and over. Still, he knew the battle he faced. Obinna was not just any man, he was a warrior, a son of wealth. His family had influence, and tradition was on his side. Kelechi had nothing to offer except his art and his love. Would that be enough? His mother, watching from the doorway, sighed. "You are thinking of her." Kelechi nodded. "She is meant for you," she said simply. "The moon itself has chosen." Kelechi chuckled, though there was no humor in it. The moon does not speak in the language of men. The elders, however, do. And they will not let me have her easily. His mother walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then you must show them that love is stronger than tradition." 2 days later, Adana's father called for another meeting. The elders had decided, since the moon had not given a clear answer, the choice must still be made in the traditional way. A challenge. Obinna and Kelechi would compete in a series of tests to prove who was more worthy. Strength, skill, wisdom, and the favor of the ancestors. Whoever won would have Adana's hand in marriage. The village prepared for the event with great excitement. Some whispered that it was unnecessary, that the gods had already spoken. But others, especially those who supported Obinna, saw it as an opportunity to restore tradition. Adana, however, was furious. She stormed into her father's hut the night before the challenge. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "I am not a prize to be won." Her father looked at her with tired eyes. "Daughter, I understand your heart, but we are bound by our ways. If Kelechi is truly the one, let him prove it." Adana's hands trembled. "And if he fails?" Her father's expression did not change. "Then you will marry Obinna." She left the hut feeling powerless. For the first time in her life, she feared the future. The next morning, the village gathered in the central square. The elders sat in a semicircle, watching as the first test began. It was a test of physical strength, an old custom where the men had to wrestle and prove their might. Kelechi stood before Obinna, knowing this was where his greatest weakness lay. He was strong for a sculptor, but Obinna was a warrior. This was his domain. The drums began, and the two men circled each other. Obinna struck first, his grip like iron as he slammed Kelechi into the dust. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Stay down," Obinna muttered. "You do not belong here." But Kelechi gritted his teeth and rose. Again and again, he fell. Again and again, he stood. In the end, Obinna was declared the victor of the first test. But the way Kelechi kept rising, even when his body ached, left an impression on the crowd. The next test was skill. Each man was given a task that reflected his strengths. Obinna was given a spear to strike a moving target. Kelechi was given a block of wood to carve something meaningful. Obinna went first, his spear slicing through the air, hitting the target dead center. The crowd roared in approval. Then Kelechi stepped forward, his hands steady despite the tension. With every stroke of his knife, a shape emerged. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Silence fell as the villagers watched. And when he finally stepped back, the elders gasped. He had carved the image of the moon, cradling the face of a woman. Adana's face. The meaning was clear. The moon had already chosen. The elders whispered among themselves. The test was declared a tie. The last test was the most difficult. Both men were to seek the wisdom of the ancestors. They would go into the sacred forest at sunset and return by dawn. Whoever brought back the most valuable lesson would be the true victor. That night, Obinna and Kelechi entered the forest. Obinna relied on his warrior instincts, hunting for something impressive, perhaps the claw of a great beast. He believed strength would earn the ancestors' favor. Kelechi, however, sat beneath an ancient tree and listened. He heard the rustling of the leaves, the distant howl of the wind, the whisper of the spirits. And then, just before dawn, he heard it again. His name, carried in the wind. When he returned to the village, Obinna held up a great lion's claw. The elders nodded in approval. But Kelechi held up nothing. Instead, he spoke. The ancestors do not need proof of strength. They only need a listening heart. I heard them in the wind, in the trees. And they told me, love is the strongest force of all. Silence. Then, the village seer stood. The challenge is over. He turned to Adana's father. There is no need for further debate. The ancestors have made their choice. Obinna clenched his fists, but he knew he had lost. Adana looked at Kelechi, her heart full. The prophecy had been fulfilled. Something unexpected happened thereafter that night, that left everyone in shock, more especially Adana, who thought fate had it all figured out for her and Kelechi. To be continued.